Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Social Audio Think Tank with myself, Josh, from Melbourne, and my co-host Jackson from Oz Podcast. How you going, Jackson?
Going good, thanks, Josh.
That's
Say
good.
That every time.
That is good to hear. You mix it up. So today's episode is called the Implode-isode. So why is it called the Implode-isode? It's basically about imploding your podcast, which I've had some experience with lately, and essentially what I'm getting at is, I know it sounds a bit crazy, but is choosing to podcast in less than ideal conditions for your show, whether that's the physical environment or whether, recording equipment's not your normal stuff or you're just not in the right, mental space or whatever that particular undesirable condition is, versus just not podcasting at all. So the reason I bring this subject up is, and I've talked to Jackson about this, I'm not sure if I've brought it up on this show before, but my main show, Braver by the Day, was going really, really well. And then I got really, really, really sick last year. And it's the middle of 2014 now, but I've been unwell since, August 2013. So I really just couldn't keep up my release schedule or doing the interviews, and I just felt, a lot better now, but I felt really horrible for a long time. So that was my first obstacle. Did I reduce the number of shows? Did I stop altogether? Because it's a pretty undesirable circumstance when you're trying to interview people over Skype and you're sitting there hunched over feeling like you need to go to the hospital covered in sweat. So I'm sure a lot of podcasters are covered in sweat when they're recording their podcast, just maybe not the hospital element. And I think the podcasters out there get a chuckle out of that. They all know there's a lot of sweat involved. Basically, that was something where I pretty much just wound back how often I was releasing the episodes, and the audience still grew a little bit, and I got more, feedback, and everyone was very supportive. So that was really, really cool. It was a good experience, actually, to hear from people around the world that was, cared about if I was okay or whatever. But then I moved to Melbourne, and my old house, I never gave that place credit for just being a regular little unit that I shared with one of my best mates. And it didn't have any soundproofing or anything. Just, it had low ceilings and some curtains, and it had this awesome sound quality. And then I moved in with my younger brother in Melbourne into a room which pretty much had the worst sound imaginable. It was unbelievably bad. It basically sounded like I had my microphone sitting in an esky. And if you're from overseas, that's like a beer chest. So if you've ever picked up like a really thick box, a wooden box or an esky or a beer chest or something, and then talked into it, that incredible reverberation, rumbly, low rumble, just horrible sound. Sounds like you're, yelling at the top of your voice inside of a big tank or something. That was what my podcast sounded like for several months. And
hence why we're recording in a radio station.
Yeah, hence why I'm still living there, so I don't really have the option to record in my house really very easily. It was so disappointing and so disheartening, because from the very first interview I did, I'm like, wow, that sounds so horrible. Like, it would have sounded better if I was outside and there was cars going by and wind and stuff. It would have been a less irritating sound. It was just so hard to work with, and my guests would not always have the best sound quality themselves, yet it wouldn't matter if they were going through Skype into an iPad and then talking into a set of Apple earbuds. Their sound quality was better than mine.
Yeah.
And as someone who's got multiple shows and, I've been in bands and care about sound quality to a certain degree, it was just really depressing. And Braver by the Day just went... And, yeah, it wasn't... I love the show and it's not stopping, but just the fact that I can't record when I want.
Yeah.
And because I interview people from overseas, generally they're free in the afternoon to record, so I have to record, between 6 and 10 a.m. in the morning. I can't go somewhere else first, like make the trip down to Southern FM Studios and then record something, or I can't go out to someone else in my family's house and then fire up Skype that early in the morning and record.
Yeah.
I basically just have to not do it. And, yeah, that's just been really hard to deal with. So I don't know if you've ever had that situation, but basically I needed to make the choice. Do I keep podcasting knowing that the quality is just nowhere near where I wanted it to be because of my environment in the room I was in? Or do I just not put out episodes and hope that my audience doesn't abandon me till such time that I can sort it out? So, yeah, no, it's a bit of a long-winded story, but yeah, it was really hard because I worked so hard on the show, and then all of a sudden, just because of the room I was in, the end product went from being above average in quality, in my mind, to being, well below average. It was hard to listen to. So, what are your feelings on that?
Yeah, I kind of had a bit of a similar experience where I recorded a podcast. I recorded some stories for my podcast, The Forgetting Curve, and I recorded them outside next to a tennis court with a couple of particularly loud young men playing tennis, and it was completely audible in the final recording. And I guess I have an advantage over you in that those stories only ended up making a small part of the podcast. They weren't the whole podcast week in, week out for months. So I still used them. I still went ahead with them. But yeah, it's if that was the whole podcast, I think it'd be a tough decision if I wanted to keep it going or not.
Yeah. That was more so through necessity, though, of having to go out and interview somebody.
Yeah.
So for anyone out there that's listening to this and this is your first experience of our show, we generally don't do much prep work on these subjects, so you get our instant kind of response. And they're all things that Jackson and I have talked about in the past, so it's not like there's no research behind it or anything like that. But that to me is different to what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Because you had the option to keep that show going, just to make sure you never recorded in that environment again. Whereas the situation that I was in, not that I'm saying, that as well as me, it was worse or whatever, but it was something that I really just couldn't avoid.
Yeah.
Because I can't go take over some other region of the house because, A, the building materials are the same, the roofs in all those rooms are just as high. I'm pretty sure that there's a lot of space under the floor too because everything just reverberates around that house. When I play guitar, it feels like the floor is basically wobbling around.
Yeah.
There's just a lot of building problems with the building itself. So I can't, and also I can't just go inhabit some other space and kick my brother out of the lounge room or some other area of the house. So I was stuck either bedroom or nothing. And in the end, I just recorded less episodes and they just sounded really annoying.
Yep.
But there's always people that say, oh, your end listeners aren't as discerning as you are. They are when you really care about the listener and they've been with you for a while. If you start bad and then get better and better and better and better over time, I don't think people are going to hold that against you. But when it's your third or fourth podcast and you start at good quality and then all of a sudden it just really goes, to crap, for the lack of a better term, particularly on your side of the call, if you're doing Skype interviews, people are going to pretty much jump ship. Because if I was a long-time listener and I was, kind of into the show, but I wasn't hardcore about it, and then all of a sudden it sounded like I just didn't care anymore what the sound was like. And, yeah, it happened several episodes in a row. Yeah. I don't think I would stay subscribed. So thanks to anyone who's listening to this show, because they are from my Braver by the Day audience. I really appreciate the people that have stuck with me, but I may have actually been better off just not releasing any shows.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not sure I was better off releasing bad-sounding shows than I was releasing none. Because if you're new to my show now and you go and download the last 10 episodes, half of them sound like crap.
Yeah.
And they're not as good as the first 30, so I don't know. I'm overthinking it, but...
No, I think there's some people are going to just drop off straight away and say, oh, it's turned to crap. I think there's some people who might stick it out for a while, but if you keep doing it, if that's, the new way it's going to be, then you're probably going to lose some of them, and there's going to be a small percentage that might hang around for your content rather than the sound quality, but it is probably going to hurt you to have bad sound quality. Particularly
if it is distractingly bad.
Yeah.
Because I actually had to take out a lot of different frequencies to even make it so it didn't sound like you had, 2 tin cans on the side of your head when I was talking. Like, it was really hard to listen to.
Yeah.
Like, a noise in the background, like a tennis ball, that's something that if people can get the context of, or you can mention it, I'm next to a tennis court and people are going to be like, oh, cool, there's tennis going on in the background, that's what that sound is. But when it's continuous through the entire side of my part of the call, I can imagine that I would have lost listeners, and I might have picked some up since then from my older episodes, but yeah, it's pretty rough. So one thing I was going to bring up too, and it's something I've never heard on a podcast about podcasting, there's a certain school of thought out there that you need to have the best sounding show you can, which I do agree with. Like, it doesn't need to sound like radio or like, an audio book or something, but it needs to sound good. And there's other people just say, I'll just put out whatever it is and just roll with it. And I tend to agree with both sides of that argument, depending on the type of show. But for the people that we're speaking to that have hobby shows, sports shows, think like comedy, sci-fi, TV, all that sort of stuff, the less business stuff, the actual quality of those productions that you're talking about or you're covering, they get better and better and better and better every year.
Yeah.
Your podcast, quality production-wise, actually has to follow that same... You can't go in the other direction Because now that they've got slow motion on every single sports video, you can't just say, okay, I couldn't be bothered recording on, my full podcasting rig, my NBA basketball show. I'm just going to record it on my iPhone through a set of earbuds and, record it on the voice recorder.
Yeah.
Because what you're speaking about and the thing that you're covering, that's all getting better and better and better, particularly in quality of sound.
Yeah.
And it might sound like a strange point to make, but I don't think that when the thing you're covering gets better and better as far as their audio and visual, that your podcast can't, it should never go the opposite way, which was what mine did, and that's why I was so depressed about it.
Yeah.
Maybe depressed is the wrong word, that's a bit strong, but it was disappointing that my podcast didn't follow the trajectory of my show. The show was getting better, and the content was better, but the sound quality was probably pulling it back to not really improving much overall. So yeah, I don't know if you would agree with that, but
yeah, there was sort of another thing I had on the Forget and Curve podcast where I wanted to do it every week and just pump it out until I ran out of stories, but I put out 8 episodes and then stopped because part of the makeup of the podcast was there was backing music, and I'd basically have to, it was the same melodies, but I'd rearrange it each week to fit the stories. And the last few weeks I was doing it at the last minute and I was not doing my best work.
Yeah.
So I thought, this isn't the quality I want to put out. I'm just going to put it on pause until I feel like I can put my best work into this. So that's sort of the same thing of the quality is just not there.
Yeah.
And if it's not getting better, then why am I doing it?
Do you feel like maybe, getting back to the Implode-isode and undesirable conditions of podcasting, do you think maybe you actually inadvertently built an undesirable element to your podcast, being a certain production level that's really hard to maintain with the release schedule that you actually have? Because creating and manipulating sound beds for podcasts is really towards the highly produced end,
yeah,
as opposed towards the iPhone recording on a voice recorder end. Do you think maybe you've created a condition for yourself that makes it tougher to do it? Because I know I did that with my Braver by the Day schedule. Like, it was, 10 episodes a month.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't do that.
Yeah.
I got sick and I just couldn't do the interviews with people to keep it going. So I built in an undesirable condition by myself.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess we're holding ourselves up to a standard of what we'd like to be. I was basing myself off like a sort of radio show model, but they're getting paid to do it. That's their job.
Yeah.
They've got, that's their day is devoted to making that. They're
paid to find the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
So my thing was very, I really built it in to, I wanted it to sound that good, and then it wasn't a huge outlay. It was probably maybe 10 hours a week, so it's not a lot, but it was dedicated time. It was a lot of prep work.
Yeah. So basically, with the 2 options that I presented earlier, do you keep podcasting and just take the undesirable elements on the chin, or do you actually just stop? Whether you're stopping forever or not, that's a different thing, but I went the option of just power through it and hope for the best, and just take it on the chin that the quality is not going to be quite where I want it to be, and definitely where my audience would expect it to be, the long-term listeners, if there are any, but I'm hoping there are. There are certain people I know that have been there since day one. Whereas you've basically just gone, I absolutely just don't want to compromise, which is cool. I mean, I'm not saying, no, that's not a bad thing. I think that's awesome. It's artistically very credible to me, and that's kind of, hopefully they're the people that we're speaking to with Social Audio Think Tank, where you want to be proud of it yourself, and you want it to be what you want it to be.
Yeah.
So what's the plan? Like, this might go into a future conversation that I've got coming up called the Implode-isode, but is there a plan for are you basically going to try and get that music together before you revive the show, or are you at a point where you're thinking about the show maybe just stopping full stop?
No, I definitely want to keep going with it, and I've got a lot bigger plans to do a lot of different things with it. I think part of my idea, even when I started it, was because it's sort of collected interviews and put together in a semi-random order, I can just make a whole series of them and then schedule them. And so I could take a day or two to do 8 episodes, schedule them for the next 8 weeks, take a break, and then come back to it. Or just do it in like 20-minute chunks over those next 8 weeks, and then I could. But I've never really operated like that, so I haven't done that yet.
Yeah, that's cool. I think maybe the trap that I fell into, and it's something that you kind of just made me think about, is that my commitment was always to the content with Braver by the Day more than my other shows. Like, I care a lot about the content for the other shows, but like on my hobby show, 999 Podcast, sometimes that'll just go off into La La Land and we'll never come back on the tracks. Like, just prog rock talk, or I'm not even on the show sometimes if it's a live interview by one of the contributors, like Jimmy, my co-host. Whereas on Braver by Day, I was very intentional about, I want the content to be great. I think I got a little bit distracted by trying to make the production great and setting myself this unrealistic schedule where I don't think my audience would have been, any worse off if I had basically just released, one episode a fortnight from day one than releasing all those episodes now. I think that basically where I'm trying to get to with that is, I think that maybe over time of doing that show, I lost my focus a little bit. I mean, not that the content got better and better, but I managed to, for some, fluke it and get a couple of really inspiring, powerful guests, which really helped. I think that maybe I started personally focusing on the production side of it. It became even in my consideration to the content. And I think if I was really just focused on content and I'd never lost my focus, I would have just thought, okay, you're sick, or whatever it happens to be, or you've moved into this terrible sounding house. Just wind everything back and just remember the one thing you can give your audience that they're going to care more about than anything is the very best podcast you possibly can when you do release one.
Yeah.
Instead of worrying about the schedule that I'd set up for myself and thinking, okay, if I want to keep the schedule going, I need to release crap that I'm not happy with. Not that listening back to crap, but that's how I felt about it. Yeah, I'm happy that you're keeping Forgetting Curve going. And I do want to dig in a future episode about how you're planning on changing that up. So, yeah, that'll be coming in the future. So that might do for today. I actually don't have a podcast really of the week. There's a good episode of Osher Gunsberg's podcast with Grant Bowler that might be worth checking out if you're looking for something fresh to listen to. But yeah, I haven't really checked out many new shows this week.
No, I'm about the same. I've sort of just been listening to the same things.
Cool. So I'll just run through the tech super quickly for anyone who's been listening through that. It's similar to the last few episodes. We've got Sennheiser MD421s, which are the in-studio microphones at Southern FM, radio station in Melbourne, running via XLR cable into a Soundcraft EFX12 desk that's going out in stereo into an M Audio Fast Track Pro, and that's via USB, I think it is, from what I can see from this side of the desk, into a Mac, and that's recording on Logic. Radio Jackson. So my Twitter is @JoshuaC.Liston.
And mine is @OzPodcasts.
And we're back to doing those at the end again.
Yep.
Yeah, by the precedent I set in the last episode didn't last long. Okay, well, thanks everybody so much for listening, and anyone who's left us a review in iTunes. It really means a lot. And hopefully you're getting something fresh from our show. I don't know if I told Jackson, but I changed the iTunes description to not your average podcast about podcasting.
I saw it,
which is a little bit of a hint to Marvel and stuff like that. So, cool. Radio, mate. Well, it was good to talk to you, and I'll see you later.
Home and away, fighting for a piece of you. Just a little moment slipping away.
Listen to Australian podcasts. ozpodcasts.com.au